The last healer in the north set down her satchel at the foot of my bed, would not meet my eyes, and told my council in a low voice what all of them already knew. By the time the leaves turned, she said, both the wolf and the king would be gone. No one argued with her. That was how I understood, better than by any fever or any weakness in my own hands, that I was dying. My council had argued with everything I ever said. They had argued with my father before me and his father before him. And now they stood along the cold stone wall of my chamber with their heads bowed and their mouths shut, and not one of them told the healer she was wrong. I lay on my back and watched the firelight move on the beams above me, and listened to Bracken breathe. You must understand what a wolf is to a man of the Pinehold, or none of the rest of this will make sense to you. In the low country they will tell you an alpha has a wolf, the way a lord has a horse or a hound. That is a child's understanding. In Duncrag we know the truth of it. A man and his wolf are not two things bound together. They are one life wearing two shapes. When my wolf ran the high ridges in the gray before dawn, it was I who ran them. When I sat in judgment in my hall, it was he who sat there, folded down small behind my ribs, watching through my eyes. We were not companions. We were the same breath drawn twice. And a breath drawn twice can be cut twice. Bracken lay by my bed on a heap of furs the servants kept warm for him, and he had lain there for the better part of a season, and he was going out like a lamp with no more oil in it. His gray coat had gone dull and grizzled. His flanks rose and fell too slow, with a little catch at the top of each breath, as if the air itself had grown heavy for him. He would not eat. He would not lift his head for me any more, and I was the one being in the world he had always lifted his head for. When I laid my hand on his skull, he did not lean into it as he had done 10,000 times across the years of my reign. He only lay there and grieved, and I lay above him in the great carved bed and grieved with him, because his grief and mine had always been the same grief, and now it was killing us both. No one could tell me why. That was the thing that had emptied my hall of every healer, herb woman, bone setter, priest, and head charmer in the north. It was not a wound they could find. No blade had touched him. No poison sat in his blood that any of them could name or draw. There was no fever to break, no swelling to lance, no bad tooth, no barb, no worm. There was only the fading, the slow, patient going out, and a great wolf, who had been the terror of the northern passes, lying on warm furs with his eyes half open, sinking, while a healer packed her satchel and would not look at me. How long? My steward asked her at the door. His name was Corin, and he had served my house 40 years, and his voice, which I had never once heard shake, shook. Days, the healer said. A hand of days, perhaps 2. When the wolf goes, the king goes with him. You know the old law here better than I do. And she went out into the cold, and the last light of the last healer in the north went with her. They did not wait even a full day before they began to bury me. I do not say that to shame them. A kingdom cannot be left masterless, and the Pinehold sat between 3 hungry neighbors in a hard winter, and my council loved Duncrag even more than they feared me. So while I lay listening to Bracken breathe, they gathered in the long hall below and did the arithmetic of my death. And by evening my steward came up the stair with his hands folded and told me what they had decided. I had no heir of my body. I had never taken a mate. That was the great failure of my reign, and every man on my council had told me so, gently and then less gently, across 15 years. Choose a Luna, Alaric. Secure the line. A pack with no Luna is a pack with a wound in its side. And I had put them off and put them off because, and I had never said this aloud to any living soul, because I had waited. Since I was a boy I had waited. Every alpha of my blood, so the old women said, would one day feel the pull of his faded one, the other half of the bond. The mate the moon had already chosen before either of them drew breath. My father had felt it the night he met my mother, across a crowded feast hall, and he had walked the length of that hall like a man in a dream, and never once looked away from her again. I had felt it never. Season on season, feast on feast, ceremony on ceremony, I had stood in my hall and looked at every worthy woman my council paraded before me, and felt nothing but the cold ordinary weight of a king with a duty. And each time I sent them away I told myself, not yet. She is out there. The bond will know her. I will not wed a stranger and call it love while the true one still walks the world unfound. So I waited, and I grew from a young king into a hard one, and my council despaired, and Bracken waited with me. That is a thing I did not understand until the very end, and I will come to it. Now with me dying the arithmetic was simple and cruel. My steward told it plainly. They would have you wed, he said, before the leaves turn, before he could not finish. The Lady Serapha of the Asheville Pax is 3 days' ride south. Young, of good blood, and her father would bring us 200 spears, and the eastern passes closed to our enemies. The council would send riders tonight. If you are wed, and if there is even the hope of an heir, the line holds. The Pinehold does not fall to Lord Phelan. Lord Phelan, there it was, my cousin of the collateral line, who had smiled at me at every feast for 15 years and hated me across every one of them. If I died childless and unwed, the crown of the Pinehold passed sideways to him. He was in my hall even now. He had ridden in to be at his cousin's side in his hour, and he sat below in my own great hall drinking my own wine, and everyone knew, and no one said, that he had come to watch me die and be near the throne when it fell. So this was the shape of my last days. Marry a girl I had never met to buy my kingdom 200 spears, get an heir if the moon was merciful and die, or refuse and hand Duncrag to a cousin who would bleed it. Send the riders, I told my steward. Corin stared at me. In 40 years I had never once seen him weep, and he did not weep now, but something went out of his face. My king. Send them, Serapha of Asheville, if she'll have a dying man. I turned my head on the pillow and looked at Bracken, at the slow catch and fall of his breath. The Pinehold does not go to Phelan, whatever it costs me. And I closed my eyes, and I heard my steward go down the stair to send the riders that would marry me to a stranger, and I lay in the dark and waited to die. That was the night she came. I did not see it. I only heard it afterward and pieced it together from Corin and from the gate guard and from the woman herself, long after, on better nights. But I will tell it to you the way it happened at the gate, because it matters. It was full dark and cold with the first hard cold of the turning year, and the gate of Duncrag was shut, as it is always shut after dark, and out of the pines came a woman on foot. No horse, no escort. A cloak gray with road dust, and a satchel over her shoulder and mud to the knee, walking up out of the black woods to a strange king's gate at an hour when honest folk are indoors. And she stood below the wall and called up to the guard that she had heard, 3 valleys south, that there was a sickness here no healer could touch, and she had come to see it. The guard laughed at her. I do not blame him. Every charlatan and beggar and false charmer in the north had come to Duncrag that season, drawn like crows to the smell of a dying king, and every one of them had wanted gold, and none of them had done a thing but empty their purses of promises. She had no horse and no name and no house and no wolf. That last was the thing that damned her in the guard's eyes before anything else. She came to the gate of a wolf kingdom, and there was no wolf in her, no pack scent, no shadow of a beast behind her eyes. To us that is not merely strange. It is very nearly not being a person at all. A wolfless one, we would have said in the old cruel word. Human, and only human and alone. Go home, mother, the guard called down. The king's dying's not a show. There's no coin in it for you. I didn't come for coin, she called back up, and she did not go. She stood at my gate in the cold the whole of that night. The guard changed at midnight, and the new man found her there and told her the same, and she gave the same answer and stayed. She did not shout. She did not beg. She simply would not leave, and there is a kind of patience that is louder than any noise, and by gray dawn word of the strange woman at the gate had gone up through the hold, servant to servant. until it reached my steward, and Corin, who had run out of every other hope and was a man drowning, came and looked at her over the wall himself. He told me later he did not know why he opened the gate. He said only that she looked up at him, tired to the bone and unafraid, and said, "I know what's wrong with him. Let me see the wolf and I'll show you." Every liar that season had said I can heal him. She was the only one who said I know what's wrong. And Corin, who was drowning, opened the gate. I woke to a stranger in my chamber. I had a sword by my bed still, a short blade I could barely lift by then, and my hand went to it out of the long habit of a king who has kept a hard border, and I got it half out of the sheath before the weakness took my arm, and I had to let it fall. She did not so much as flinch at the steel. She had eyes only for the wolf. She was younger than I had pictured from the story of the gate, near my own years, no girl, a grown woman with gray at her temples and lines at the corners of her eyes and a stillness in her that filled the room. Road-worn, plain-dressed. Her hands, I saw when she pushed back her cloak, were a healer's hands or a working woman's, scarred, clever, sure. She knelt down by Bracken on the furs without asking my leave, and my counsel would have hauled her back for the insolence of it. But there was no counsel in the room, only Corin by the door with his knuckles white, and me too weak to stop her, and the dying wolf between us. "Don't touch him," I said. My voice came out a ruin of itself. "He'll take your hand off. He's taken hands off men he loved." He would have, too, that season. The pain in him had made him savage in his last strength. 2 of my own huntsmen wore the marks of it. He had snapped at me 3 nights before, and then howled after, a broken sound, because even in his ruin he had known me and been ashamed. The woman did not answer me. She looked at Bracken a long moment, at the dull gray coat and the too slow breath, and something moved across her face that I did not understand then and understand very well now. It was not fear. It was not the greedy hunger of the charmers. It was recognition, as if she had walked 3 valleys through the cold pines toward something she already knew. "Oh," she said very softly to the wolf and not to me. "Oh, you poor lost thing. You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" And she laid her bare hand on his head. "I have gone to war. I have stood on the wall at Duncrag with the eastern packs coming up the pass 3,000 strong, and held the line through a night that killed 1/3 of my men. I have felt the crown put on my head at 17 with my father not a day in the ground. I have known, I thought, every large thing a man can feel. I had never felt anything like what I felt when that stranger's hand came down on my dying wolf. It went through him first. I saw it before I felt it. I saw the great gray body that had not stirred for me in days go still in a different way, not the stillness of sinking but the stillness of a held breath, of something enormous stopping to listen. His ears, which had lain flat and dead against his skull, came up. His half-lidded eyes opened. And then, so slow it broke my heart to watch it, he turned his heavy head and leaned it into her palm, the way he had leaned into mine 10,000 times and had not leaned into anything for a season, and a sound came out of him that I had feared I would never hear again. Not a snarl, not the broken howl of his pain. A long, low, easing sigh, the sound a creature makes when a weight it has carried past all bearing is lifted off it at last. And then it came into me. I have tried many times to find the words, and there are none that are big enough, so I will give you the small ones. For a season I had been falling. That was the truest way to name the sickness. From the inside of it, not pain, not fever, but a slow, endless falling, a going down, as if the floor of the world had been very gently taken away, and I had been sinking through cold dark with nothing to catch me and no bottom to strike. And I had grown so used to the falling that I had forgotten there was any other way to be. When her hand touched Bracken, the falling stopped. It simply stopped, the way a stone stops when it lands, except there was no jar of landing, only the sudden unbearable stillness of being held. Warmth came up through me from somewhere below my heart, up the cold length of my arms and into my dead hands. And my hands, that had not been able to lift a short sword, closed on the furs of my own accord and gripped them. And I heard myself make a sound I am not ashamed of, because I was a man who had been falling in the dark for a season, and had just felt the ground come up warm and solid beneath him. The woman went very still. Her hand stayed on the wolf, but her eyes came up off him, slow, and found mine across the little space, and I saw in her face the same astonishment that must have been in my own, the look of two people who have each felt, in the same instant, the same impossible thing, and know beyond any doubting that they have felt it together. "You feel that?" she said. It was not a question. Her voice had gone unsteady for the first time. "Yes," I said. "I don't," she stopped. Her hand pressed a little harder into the gray fur, as though to be sure it was real, and Bracken sighed again and pushed up against her palm, greedy for it now, alive with it. "I've laid hands on 100 sick beasts. It's never gone both ways before." And I, who had waited my whole life and felt nothing, and had lain down to die still waiting, looked at the road-worn stranger kneeling on the floor of my chamber with her hand on my wolf and the warmth of her running up my own dead arms, and I understood, all at once and far too late, what I had been waiting for. I will not pretend I said anything worthy of the moment. I said, "Who are you?" She took her hand off the wolf, carefully, the way you set down something you have promised to pick up again, and Bracken whined and nosed after it, and that small, ordinary greed of a healing animal did more to convince my heart than any wonder had. She sat back on her heels. "Eloin," she said, "I'm nobody, a healer. I go where the sick things are." She looked down at Bracken, then back at me, and I watched her put together behind her tired eyes the thing she had already half guessed at my gate. "Your steward said no one could find the wound. That's because it isn't a wound. There's nothing in him to cut out or draw off or burn away. I could have told them that from the door." "Then what is killing him?" I said. "What is killing me?" She was quiet a moment. When she spoke, she chose the words like a woman crossing thin ice. "Absence," she said. "He's not sick, my king. He's grieving. He's been grieving so long and so hard that the grief has become a hole in him, and he's been going down into the hole and pulling you down after. I've seen it in animals that lose a mate. I've seen it in old dogs whose person dies, they lie down and they will not eat, and there is nothing wrong with them that any healer can name, and they die of the missing." She looked at Bracken, whose breath, I realized, had already steadied under the memory of her hand. "But I've never seen it in a beast whose person was still alive, and lying right beside him. So it wasn't you he was missing." Her eyes lifted to mine, and there was fear in them now, and wonder, and something I had no name for. It was someone he'd never met, someone he knew was coming and had waited for all your life, the way you wait for a thing you were promised, and then you didn't come to him, year on year, and he gave up. He stopped believing you'd ever come, and a wolf that stops believing lies down and dies. The chamber was very quiet. Corin by the door had stopped breathing. I lay in my great bed and felt the truth of it settle over me like a cloak, cold and then, slowly, warm. "He wasn't waiting for me to find a mate," I said slowly. "He was waiting for her, the one I never found." My voice caught. "He knew the whole time that she was real." It was I who stopped believing. I told my council she was out there, and every year I believed it a little less, and every year he faded with your believing, Eloin said gently. "Yes, I think so." I looked at her, the gray at her temples, the mud on her cloak, the scarred, clever hands that had come 3 valleys through the cold on no horse to lay themselves on a dying stranger's wolf. "And you walked up out of the pines to my gate," I said, "in the dark, with no coin in it, because you heard 3 valleys off that there was a sickness here no one could touch." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She did not answer at once. And when she did, I saw it cost her, because she was a woman who had spent her whole life a stranger at strange gates, and it is a hard thing for such a one to say a hopeful thing aloud. "I don't know," she said. "I've never known why I go where I go. I heard about it in a market 3 valleys south, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I lay down that night and I couldn't sleep for thinking about a wolf I'd never seen. I got up in the dark and I walked. I've been walking my whole life, my king, toward sick things I couldn't have known were sick, but I have never once in my life walked toward a thing the way I walked toward that gate. Like there was a rope in my chest, and something on the other end of it was pulling me home. Home, she said, to a place she had never seen. To a dying man she had never met. Bracken heaved himself up off the furs. It took him 3 tries and his legs shook, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in a season. He crossed the little space on his shaking legs and he lay down again, not by my bed where he had lain dying, but with his great gray head laid across Aloin's knees, and he looked up at her with the eyes of a creature that has come home from a long way off, and he sighed and slept. Truly slept. Not the sinking. The good deep sleep of a healing thing. And I felt that sleep come warm through the both of us, wolf and man, and for the first time in a season I was not falling. I did not die that night, nor the next, and by the 3rd day I could sit up, and by the 6th I could stand, and the whole hold went from a house of mourning to a house that did not know what it was, because a king they had buried in their hearts was walking his own corridors again, thin and gray and leaning on the wall, but walking. And beside him, everywhere, went a road-worn stranger with no wolf in her and no house behind her, and a great gray wolf, who would not now be more than an arm's length from her side. You will imagine that my hall rejoiced. Some of it did. Corin wept at last on the 6th day when I put my hand on the wall and stood without his arm, and he was not ashamed of it, and I was not ashamed to see it. The old servants who had known me since I was a boy looked at Aloin the way you look at a saint who has come down the chimney. The huntsman whose hands Bracken had marked came, awkward and huge, to stand in her doorway and thank her without words. But a hall is not its servants. A hall is its lords, and its lords did not rejoice. They had, you will remember, already begun to bury me. They had sent riders south to buy me a bride and 200 spears. They had done the cold arithmetic of my death, and in the doing of it certain men had let themselves begin to imagine the shape of a pinehold after Alaric, and it is a hard thing to make a man unimagine a throne once he has let himself picture his own shadow across it. And into that hall, into that arithmetic, walked a wolfless woman off the road, and undid all of it with her bare hand. Lord Phelan came to me on the 7th day. He came smiling as he always came. He was a handsome man, my cousin, with an easy warmth that had fooled better men than the ones he meant to fool, and he took my thin hands in his broad ones and told me how his heart had lifted to see me risen, how he had prayed each night at my sickbed's door, how the whole North would ring with the joy of it. And under all the warm words, the way a knife lies under a cloak, was the thing he had really come to say, and at last, gently, he said it. "But cousin," he said, "we must speak of the woman." "Must we?" I said. "Alaric," he lowered his voice all concern. "I say this as your blood and your friend. A stranger walks up out of the woods in the dead of night, wolfless, nameless, and lays a spell on your beast, and now she does not leave your side, and the whole hold whispers her name like a prayer. Do you not see it? Whatever she did, and I grant you she did something, a thing that no healer in the North could do, a thing against the very law of our kind, done by a woman with no wolf in her. That is not healing, cousin. In the old days we had a harder word for a wolfless one who could reach into a wolf and turn it. He let the word hang unsaid, which is the cruelest way to say a word. The council is afraid. Some of them are saying it aloud. I have quieted them as best I could for love of you. But you must send her from the hold, cousin, before this fear becomes something neither of us can quiet. Reward her richly and send her south. Let the Ashfell match go forward. Let the Pinehold have its Luna of good blood and its 200 spears, and let this, his mouth thinned, this road witch go back to the road. I had known him all my life. I heard, under the warm concern, exactly what he was doing, and it was very well done, and had I been a weaker man or a more frightened one it would have worked. He was not wrong that the council was afraid. Fear of the wolfless who could touch a wolf was an old fear and a real one. He had only to feed it and let it drive her out, and let the Asheville bride come. And if I got no heir, and a king wed at death's door to stranger might well get none, then the throne would still, in the end, roll sideways to him. And Aloan, my Aloan, whom I had waited my whole life for, would be 3 valleys gone, back on the cold roads, a stranger at strange gates, and I would never find her again, and bracken would fade, and this time there would be no one walking up out of the pines. "Tell me, cousin," I said, "when the healers came all that season, the ones who wanted gold, the ones with their herbs and their charms, did you counsel me to send them from the hold, for fear?" His smile did not move, but something behind it did. "They were harmless," he said. "They were," I agreed, "perfectly harmless, because none of them could do a thing, and you did not fear them at all." I looked at my cousin, and for the first time in 15 years I let him see that I had always known him. "You fear her, Phelan, for the one reason she is not harmless, because she worked. Because I am not dying anymore, and the throne is not falling sideways, and every warm word you ever gave me was a man waiting at a deathbed for the bed to do its work." The hall had gone quiet around us. Some of the council had drifted near, the way lords do when they smell a reckoning. "Cousin," Phelan said low, "have a care what you say before." "I have had care my whole life," I said. "I am done with it. Here is what I say before all of them." And I turned from him because he did not matter any more, and I found Aloan where she stood at the edge of the hall with her hand in Bracken's ruff, and I looked at her, and I said the thing I should have said on the first night. But I get ahead of myself, because before I could say it she nearly left. That is the part of this I have never told at feast, because it shames me, and because it is hers to tell and not mine. But you should have it, so that you understand she was not a prize I picked up off the road. She was a free woman who very nearly walked back into the dark, and if she had, no crown of mine could have stopped her. It was the night before Phelan came to me, the 6th night, when I first stood on my own. Word of the council's fear had already run down through the hold, and Aloan, who had spent her whole life a stranger at strange gates, knew the sound of that particular whisper better than anyone in Duncrag. She had heard it in 100 villages. The wolfless woman, the one who reaches into the beasts, nameless, houseless. Where does she come from? What is she? Is it right? Is it holy? Send her on, send her on. She had been sent on from 100 gates. She knew how it went. So that 6th night she packed her satchel. Corin found her at the postern in the gray before dawn, cloak on, satchel on her shoulder, Bracken pacing miserable circles around her and whining low in his throat because he did not want her to go and could not say so. And Corin, God keep him, did not argue and did not command her, because he was a wise old man and he knew she was not a servant to command. He only woke me. I came down to the postern on my own 2 shaking legs with the cold stone under my bare feet, and I found her there at the little gate, half in the dark, ready to be a stranger again. "You're leaving," I said. "You're well enough now," she said. She would not look at me, she looked at the gate. "The wolf's turned the corner, he'll keep if you keep him warm and near you and let him believe you'll not leave him again. He doesn't need me to live anymore, he needs you to stay." Her voice was steady and kind, and it was breaking my heart. That was all it ever was. I only had to make him believe again. "He can hold the belief himself now. My work's done." "That is not why you're leaving." She was quiet. "I've been run out of better halls than this," she said at last, very low. "By that whisper, my king. I know how the story ends. The wolfless witch heals the great man, and for a little while everyone loves her, and then the fear comes back, because fear always comes back, and then there's a night when it isn't safe for her to be inside the walls anymore. I've lived that night more than once. I would rather leave on my own feet in the dark than be put out in the light with the whole hall watching." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were dry, and that was worse than tears. "I'm not sorry I came. I felt that rope in my chest, and I followed it, and I found this. You, whatever this is. I felt it too, the night I touched him, going both ways. I know what it was. I'm not a fool, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel it." Her chin came up. but I've been a stranger at strange gates my whole life, and I've learned not to want the warm hall on the other side of them, because the warm hall is never for the likes of me. I'll not stand in your fine chamber and let myself want it and then be put out. I'd rather go now, while it's still my own choice. And there it was, the thing my counsel never understood and Phelan never understood, and I very nearly did not understand in time. She did not fear the whisper. She feared wanting. She had built a life out of never wanting the warm room, and I was the first warm room she had ever wanted, and it terrified her more than any mob at any gate. I did the only thing I could think to do. I sat down. I sat down on the cold stone of the postern step, a king in his nightshirt with his bare feet blue and his legs still shaking under him, and I looked up at her, which is a thing a king of the Pinehold does for no one, and I said, "Then go, I'll not hold you. The gate's open and I'd not shut it on a free woman for all the crowns in the north." Bracken stopped his circling and came and pressed himself against her legs, and she put her hand down into his ruff without seeming to know she did it. "But before you go, hear one thing and then decide. Not the king. Just the man you've been falling toward. I waited my whole life for this. Everyone in this hold will tell you it, that Alaric never took a Luna, that Alaric turned away every worthy woman, that Alaric grew hard and strange and alone, and no one knew why. I knew why. I was waiting. My whole life I felt the bond was real and the one it was meant for was out there, and I would not wed a stranger and call it done while she still walked the world. My counsel thought me a fool. My own wolf gave up on me. And then a woman walked up out of the pines in the dark, on no horse with no coin in it, following a rope in her chest to a gate she'd never seen. And the moment her hand touched my wolf I stopped falling, and he stood up, and the thing I'd waited my whole life to feel, I felt. Going both ways, you said it yourself. She was very still. "I'm not offering you a warm room to be put out of," I said. "I'm telling you the warm room is yours if you'll have it, not because you healed my wolf, though you did, and not because I owe you my life, though I do, but because you are the thing at the other end of the rope, Eloan, and I am the thing at the other end of yours, and we have both spent our whole lives walking toward each other in the dark. You can leave, but you'll be leaving the one gate in the world that was always going to open for you. And I don't think you'll find another that does." For a long moment she did not move at all. Bracken looked up at her. The gray light was coming up over the pines beyond the little gate, and I saw her face by it, the road-worn face of a woman who had learned so hard, so many times, not to want the warm room, deciding whether she could bear to want it now. She set her satchel down on the step. That is all. She set it down. And Bracken, who understood before either of us was ready to say it, gave a great glad bark that rang off the stones and rolled up through the sleeping hold, so that half of Duncrag woke wondering what joy had come to the king's gate in the dark. So when Phelan came to me the next day, smiling, to tell me to send the road witch south, I had already spent a night on a cold step learning what she was to me. I turned from him, and I crossed my own hall on legs that still shook, and I went to where Eloan stood at the edge of it with her hand in the wolf's ruff, and I took her scarred, clever hand in mine before the whole council of the Pinehold, and I turned with her hand in mine to face them all. "This is Eloan," I said. My voice had come back to me by then, and it filled the hall the way a king's voice should, and I was glad of it. She walked to my gate through 3 valleys of cold on no horse, for no coin, following a bond she could not name, and she laid her hand on my dying wolf and gave me back my life. Some of you fear her for it, I know. My cousin has been kind enough to carry me your fear. I did not look at Phelan. I did not need to. So let me put the fear to rest, plainly, so no man in this hall need whisper it in corners again. You fear that a wolfless woman reached into an alpha's wolf and turned it, against the law of our kind, and that only witchcraft could do such a thing. Hear me. There is no law of our kind that she broke. There is only a law of our kind that you have all forgotten, because I forgot it first and longest, and I have paid for the forgetting with a season of dying. The law is this: an alpha and his wolf are one life, and that life is made whole by the mate the moon has chosen, and a bond denied is a wound that no herb can close. Bracken did not sicken of any poison. He sickened of waiting for her while I, like a fool, stopped believing she was real. She did not turn my wolf with witchcraft. She completed him and me the way the moon meant her to from before any of us drew breath. There is no charm in the north that can do that. There is only a fated mate, and she is mine. The hall was silent. I felt the silence, and I felt too the shift under it, the old servants glad, the fearful ones reweighing their fear against the plain truth of a healed king standing on his own 2 feet with the woman's hand in his. And I felt Phelan's fear turn to something colder as he saw it all sliding out of his grip. "Cousin," he said, and his smile was gone now, and the thing beneath it was showing at last. "A king does not wed a nameless woman off the road on the strength of a story about the moon. You have no proof of any bond. You have a woman who did a strange thing and a sick man's gratitude. The council sent for the Lady of Ashfell in good faith. 200 spears. The eastern passes closed. You would throw that away, throw away the safety of the Pinehold, for a—" "Say it, cousin," I said quietly. "You've wanted to say it for 15 years, say the word." He did not. He was not brave enough, in the end, before the whole hall, to say the word to the face of a king who was not dying any more. And in not saying it before every lord of the Pinehold, he showed them all at last the thing I had known my whole life and never proven, that his warmth was a cloak, and there had always been a knife under it, and it had been pointed at me the whole time. It was Eloin who answered him, not I. She took her hand from mine, gently, the way she set down anything she meant to pick back up, and she stepped forward, this road-worn stranger, into the middle of the great hall of Duncrag, before the assembled lords of the north, alone, wolfless, nameless, unafraid. "You want proof," she said to Phelan. Her voice was not loud, it did not need to be. "I've never asked anyone to believe me. I know what I am and I know how it looks, but I'll give you your proof and then you'll believe me, or you'll be a man who saw and still chose not to." She looked around at them all. "Your king says an alpha and his wolf are one life. Well then." She turned and she looked at Bracken and she said, "Bracken, come." Now understand what she was doing. Bracken was the Alpha King's wolf. A wolf of the Pinehold answers to his alpha and to no other living soul. That is bred into the bone of us over 1,000 years. A wolf that answered a stranger's command would have been a thing to fear, an unnatural thing, and half the lords in that hall leaned forward waiting to see the witchcraft proven, so they could be righteous in their fear. Bracken did not answer her command. He was already moving before she finished saying it, not obedient, not compelled, but glad, the way he'd barked at the postern in the dark, the way a thing comes home. He crossed the hall to her, and he did not sit at her feet like a charmed hound. He turned and he put himself at her side, and he faced the council with her, shoulder to her knee, my wolf, the terror of the northern passes, standing his guard beside a road-worn woman as though he had guarded her all his life and would guard her to the end of it. And then he looked across the hall, past all of them, to me. And I felt what he felt, because we are one life, and what he felt was, this is her. I told you she was coming. I never stopped knowing. Thank you for believing at last. That's not a spell, Eloin said quietly into the silence. You can't spell a wolf to love you. Any of you who have had a hound know that. He stands with me because the same bond that made me stop your king from dying makes him mine to guard, and me his to heal, and all 3 of us, the wolf, the king, and the woman off the road, one thing the moon put together a long time ago and only just finished. She looked at Phelan, and there was no triumph in it, only a terrible steadiness. I don't want your spears or your passes or your throne, my lord. I've wanted nothing my whole life, because wanting was never safe for the likes of me. I only want the one thing I finally let myself want on a cold step in the dark, and that's to stop walking. That's all. To stop being a stranger at strange gates and be, just once, at home. Her voice did not break, but something in the hall did, some old hard thing in the hearts of those fearful lords, hearing a woman say a thing so plain. You can call that witchcraft if you like. I call it the first one I ever let myself keep. But they did not put her out. You will have guessed that, or there would be no story. The lords of the Pinehold are hard men, but they are not fools. And there is a thing that even hard men cannot argue with. And that thing was standing in the middle of their hall with its shoulder against her knee. A king's wolf, freely giving his guard to a stranger, which no spell can buy and no gold can hire and no witchcraft can counterfeit. Because love, in the end, cannot be faked, not even by a wolf, especially not by a wolf. One by one the fear went out of them. I watched it go. I watched old Lord Harrow, who had known my father, be the first to bow his gray head to her, and then it went down the hall like a wind through wheat, lord after lord, until the whole council of the Pinehold stood with bowed heads before a woman who had walked to their gate on no horse with no coin in it. And the only man left standing straight in all that hall was my cousin Phelan. I dealt with Phelan. That is not a tender part of the story, so I will tell it short. He had sat at my deathbed to be near a falling throne, and he had tried to drive out the one soul who could save me because she was in the way of his climbing. And when the hall turned against him, he made, that night, the mistake that men like him always make in the end. He reached for the throne by force, since he could not have it by waiting, and sent word to the Ashfell riders to bring their 200 spears not for a wedding but for a war. It failed. It failed because a healed king with a whole wolf and a hall that loved him is a very different thing from a dying one, and because the Ashfell lord, when the riders reached him, heard the whole tale and had no wish to spend 200 spears helping a treacherous cousin steal a crown from an alpha the moon itself had plainly chosen to keep alive. Phelan I did not kill. I sent him south and west out of the Pinehold to the far marches, with his life and his name and no more, and I have not seen his face since, and I do not think of it often. A man who spends his whole life waiting at deathbed's ends in the end at his own, and I wish him no worse than that. The Lady Serapha of Ashfell, I owe her a word, for she has none in most tellings and she deserves one. She was young and of good blood, and she had been offered like a coin to a dying stranger, and when the whole tale reached her she sent me in her own hand the kindest letter I have ever received. She was glad, she wrote, that the king had found his fated one, for she had had no wish to wed a dying man for his passes, and she hoped only that when her own time came, some bond would find her the way mine had found me. It did, I am told, some years later, a good match, a love match, her own. I have kept her letter. Not every soul in this story wanted a throne. Some only wanted what Aloin wanted, to be once at home. But we were not wed in haste. That surprises people. A king saved from death by his fated mate and no grand wedding in a week. But Aloin would not have it so, and she was right, as she was right about most things. You have been dying, she said, and I have been walking my whole life. Neither of us has ever once just lived a while. Let's do that first and be sure of it, and wed when we've both stopped being afraid, you of falling and me of wanting. Then it'll be a true thing and not a rescue. So we lived a while. I grew strong. The gray went out of my face and the flesh came back onto my bones, and I walked my own ridges again, and one gray dawn near the turn of the year, near, in fact, the very turn of the year when the last healer had said we would both be dead, I ran them. On 4 feet. Wolf shape for the first time in a season, up the high stone ridge above Duncrag in the cold, clean dawn. And Bracken was not a fading thing on warm furs, but a great gray shape running at my flank the way we had run since I was a boy. One life in 2 shapes, whole. And below us on the ridge path, wrapped in a good warm cloak now and not a road-worn one, with her scarred clever hands and the gray at her temples, and no more the look of a stranger at a strange gate, walked Aloin, laughing up at the 2 wolves cutting circles around her in the frost, home and staying, and wanting it out loud at last. We wed at midwinter, when the nights are longest and the fires are highest, and the whole Pinehold came, and old Lord Harrow gave her away because she had no house to give her, and half the north wept, and I did not care who saw me weep with them. She became Luna of Duncrag not because she healed a king, though she had, and not because a council bowed to her, though they had, but because she was the thing at the end of the rope, and I the thing at the end of hers, and we had both, at the very last, believed. I am an old man now, telling this by a fire, and Bracken is long gone the way wolves go, into the pines and the old stories, and there is a new gray shadow at my hearth these days, and gray in my own beard past hiding. But I will tell you how I know the whole of it was true, and not a dying man's dream, and then I am done. Every year on the turn of the leaves, the very days the last healer swore we would die alone, and I walk the high ridge above Duncrag, only the two of us. We do not speak of the dying much. We are old, and there are better things to speak of. But we walk to the flat gray stone near the top where you can see the whole hold spread out below, and we sit there a while in the cold, clean air, and she puts her scarred hand in mine, and the wolf, whichever gray shadow of the pack has chosen us that year, lies down across our feet and sighs the way Bracken sighed on the furs the night she came, the long, easing sigh of a weight lifted off. And every year on that stone, she says the same small thing to me, not the vow the priests gave us at midwinter, but her own, the one she made on a cold step in the dark with her satchel at her feet. I set it down, she says, and I never picked it back up. And every year I answer her the same. No, I say, you never did, you're home. That is how I know. A dream would have faded. This has only ever grown warmer, year on year, like a coal waking in dead ash. The same warmth that came up my dead arms the night a stranger walked out of the pines and touched my dying wolf, and with one bare hand changed everything.